So we're going to finish up the muscle lecture by discussing a few terms. So muscle tension, for example, okay, and I'm actually even going to point out that I have the definitions down here. So muscle tension is a force exerted by contracting a muscle on an object. So when you are contracting your muscle, it is going to exert a force that is going to lift an object or move an object. So the more muscle tension you have, the stronger that your muscles contract, the more of a weight that you can actually move. So it could be your leg, it could be your arm, or it could be something that is in your hand that you are moving. Okay, the load is an opposing force exerted on muscle by the weight of an object. Again, now this is not limited to just something that you will have in your hand or something that is moving along with your legs. This could be your leg itself or a body part. Okay, now we're going to talk about some different forms of contraction as well. There's this term called isometric contraction, and what I want you to do is to break that down. So iso is going to be same. So iso it means it's the same as it doesn't move, essentially. So it's staying status quo, staying the same. Okay, it's homeostasis. Now metric would be a unit of measurement. Okay, so now you're getting same measurement, meaning that you are not you're not moving the load, you're just developing tension. So that could be used when you are standing upright but not moving. So if you're standing in the anatomical position, for example, your body is not moving, but are muscles contracted? Well, yes, they are, because otherwise you'd just fall over. So they're meant to hold your joints in position. Okay, and then there's this term isotonic. Okay, muscle tension overcomes the load and moves the object. So iso meaning the same, tonic is going to be the tone of the muscle. So the tone of the muscle stays the same, but you're actually moving the object at that point. So there's a point in the contraction that actually is the breaking point that will move an object from one position to another. And then the last one that we're talking about is motor unit. That's motor unit, neuron and all muscle fibers it supplies. So that is the neuron supplying each individual muscle fiber. Okay, so the motor unit would be every muscle fiber that neuron is attaching to. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple examples. Okay, so this would be a motor unit. So you have this neuron and you have it surrounded by this myelin sheath, which is fatty tissue, and it is breaking up into several different axons that are each feeding different muscle fibers. So these are all these muscle fibers within a fascicle of the muscle. Okay, so it has to go to each individual muscle fiber in order to get it to contract. So each muscle fiber needs to have innervation from a neuron in order to contract. If it doesn't have a signal, it doesn't do anything. Okay? So what can happen is we need to stimulate enough motor units in order to move objects. So if you are trying to stand upright versus trying to run, you're going to need different muscle tone, different muscle fibers recruited. So just standing still, you might only use a few motor units, a few small fibers, whereas if you're trying to sprint, you're going to have to recruit larger fibers and more of them. Okay, so skeletal muscle fibers, so one motor unit is recruited, that can lead to an increase in the tension. Okay, but if you need to move a larger weight, so say you're going from just standing up to now you're standing up with a 45-pound weight on your attached to you. So now you need a larger motor fiber. Okay, so you need more motor units so that you can move both of those objects. Well, now let's attach 200 pounds to you. How are you going to stand up if you're still utilizing that one small fiber? It's not going to happen. You have to recruit larger fibers and more of them in order to get the maximum amount of load moved. So you're going through that isotonic contraction. Now you're getting a larger amount of muscle fibers contracting, more of a signal to that fascicle, or to multiple fascicles that are going to move the motor unit. Okay, so muscle twitch. Now there's 3 different phases to a myogram. So myogram means it's studying the recruitment of muscles. Okay, so you get a stimulus, which will be from the neuron. So again, you need to have that neuron that is going to stimulate the muscle fibers in the body. Okay, and if you don't have a neuron connecting to that muscle fiber, it's not going to fire. So get a stimulus, okay, and the stimulus can be different depending on the object that you're trying to move, and your body will actually it will change based on change and adapt based on the weight that it's trying to move. So when you get that stimulus, there is a little latent period. What that means is that it takes a small amount of time, and it's milliseconds. It takes a small amount of time from the signal going from the brain to the muscle, propagating an action potential along the line of the muscle, and then stimulating an actual contraction of the muscle. So before anything happens, after that stimulus reaches the muscle, there's going to be a period of about 5 milliseconds before it contracts. Then your muscle fibers will actually contract, so the muscle myosin heads will slide, and that is in the period of contraction, and then it's a delayed period of relaxation. Okay, so you have a small latent period, a slightly longer period of contraction, and then a long period of relaxation. And what you can do in that period of relaxation is you can actually stimulate another contraction. And if you stimulate another contraction, it can actually even increase the amount of contraction that you get. So you can strengthen a contraction if you have multiple signals close together. Okay. So the time period between action potential initiation and mechanical activity of muscle fiber is also called we just mentioned it, it's the latent period. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the different muscle responses. So you can have a different frequency or a different strength of the stimulus. Okay, so the stimulus frequency would lead to what's known as temporal summation. So it sums or adds based on the time constraints of the stimulus. So you have one stimulus, you contract, and then you relax. Okay, but if you contract and then you start to relax, but you get another stimulus, well, then you contract a little harder, and you start to relax and you contract again. It contracts harder and continues up, so that in this shorter time period you can develop a larger amount of tension and an increased contraction. So this is a low stimulation frequency, but you can imagine if you create this stimulus here, and then before you even start to relax, you create another stimulus, and then another, and another. You can build that tension up pretty quickly with more signals in a short amount of time. Okay. The stimulus strength can also make a difference, because you can actually develop multiple motor units that will contract at the same time, because now you have that neuron that's reaching out to several different motor units or several different muscle fibers, and if they all contract at the same time, you can get a stronger contraction. Okay, so here is a higher stimulus frequency, which would be increasing the contraction. If you have them, the stimuli consistently adding up, you can actually get a very strong contraction. So as I was talking about up here with a higher frequency, if you are stimulating the muscle fiber before it even relaxes, you're going to continue to increase that tension until the stimulus is taken away, which would lead to then the drop or the relaxation. And so if you have this fused tetanus, okay, so tetany would be a consistent or a constant muscle contraction that does not let up. It's like lockjaw, where your muscles in your mouth are holding together so that it does not allow your jaw to open. Okay, so if you continue to have this, the stimulus, you're not going to relax that muscle until the stimulus is gone. And in some muscles that that are slow twitch, like biceps or triceps, that are meant to contract and then relax, it can fatigue those muscles, and relaxation is a nice steep decline right here. Okay. So a single stimulus is delivered, you'll contract to the maximal tension of a single twitch, and then you'll relax. Now you get another stimulus that is applied before you fully relax. Well, now you get a larger or higher contraction, so more tension. This is an unfused tetanus. So this would be like taking your biceps muscle and slowly bringing your cup of coffee from the table up to your mouth to drink. So you get a little bit more of stimulus, a little more, and then you get to this higher tension. And then it'll start to relax as soon as, it will start to relax when you don't have the stimulus any longer. Okay, and then this is the fused tetanus, which is a complete tetanus. So you're getting the maximum tension, the maximum amount of contraction from those muscle fibers, so that you get this fused tetanus where your muscles do not relax. Okay. So the stimulus strength can also indicate how many muscle fibers are going to be contracting. So you need to reach this threshold in order to contract any of the muscle fibers. So if you have this sub-threshold stimulus, no muscle fibers are contracting. Now you get to that threshold, now you'll get a couple. And as you increase the strength of the stimulus, so more neurons that are reaching those muscle fibers, more acetylcholine released, it's going to bring more and more and more muscle fibers on board until you reach the maximal stimulus, which is when you have all of the muscle fibers in a particular area that are going to be contracting at the same time. So once you reach that maximum stimulus, you won't recruit any more muscle fibers because they're all already contracting. So this would be what the contraction looks like. So you finally reach that threshold and you get a little contraction. Okay, so a couple of muscle fibers, and then you get a stronger stimulus, more muscle fibers. Then you're going to get a stronger stimulus, more fibers, more contraction, and then you get to that maximal contraction. And again, you can only have a maximal contraction when all of your muscle fibers are working at the same time. Okay, so we mentioned isotonic and isometric contraction. So isotonic contraction is going to be the concentric and eccentric contractions. So concentric contraction, muscle is going to shorten. Okay, and eccentric is muscle is going to lengthen, but you're still having contraction of the muscle as you lengthen. Okay, so concentric is you're taking this load and you're bringing it closer. Okay, so you're shortening that muscle. So it's as if you're taking your coffee mug from the table, bringing it to your mouth, your biceps contracts, that angle will shorten and the biceps muscle is contracting. But as you go to set down your coffee mug, your biceps is still contracting. Otherwise, you'd slam that cup down with the weight of gravity and the weight of your arm coming down, as well as the weight of the coffee mug, and that the mug would shatter. So you have to still contract the muscle as you bring it all the way down. So concentric isotonic contraction is on stimulation. Muscle develops enough tension to lift the load. Once the resistance is overcome, the muscle shortens and the tension remains constant for the rest of the contraction. Eccentric would be the opposite, where the muscle tension is going to be enough that's lifting the load as that constant, and then you're slowly going to recruit fewer and fewer muscle fibers until you bring that to the length that you would like it to be. Isometric contraction is going to be the weight that exceeds the muscle's peak tension developing capabilities. So when stimulated, the tension increases to the muscle's peak tension developing capability, but the muscle does not shorten. So you're maintaining the joint length here. And this a lot of times is going to be when you have muscles contracting on opposite sides, like your quadriceps, which would be the anterior of your thigh, contracting at the same time that your hamstrings are contracting in the posterior thigh to maintain an upright posture. If you only have one side of the muscles contracting, you're going to be imbalanced and you would likely fall down. Okay, so isometric contraction, this is going to be holding that joint in the same space, so you're not moving the joint at all. You still have muscle contraction, but it's not moving the joint. Concentric, now you have movement that's shortening the joint, and eccentric is movement that will lengthen or open the joint. So isometric contraction comes into play when an individual is, well, the only one here that would make sense is maintaining an upright posture. Because if you're lifting a heavy object, your joint is going to decrease in angle. If you're walking uphill, well, you have to flex your hips and your knee. And jumping is the same. Okay. So how do you create energy for muscle contractions? Well, there's several different ways that you create that. So one is the way that we talked about before, aerobic pathways. So you get the aerobic cellular respiration, creating the most amount of ATP in your body. So you need oxygen in order to create the ATP. So the cellular respiration, getting 32 ATP from glucose, pyruvic acid, free fatty acids, amino acids from protein catabolism. So you need oxygen to create that pathway. The other ways that you can do it are the anaerobic pathways. So that's taking glucose, breaking it down to pyruvic acid, and eventually to lactic acid that goes back to the blood. And that is 2 ATP per glucose, which is lactic acid. And your byproduct is going to be lactic acid, which makes you sore in the day after a workout. So if you have too much lactic acid build up, it can lead to that soreness. Okay, so this can provide 60 seconds or more of energy, whereas the aerobic pathway is hours. And actually, they've been shown that this is good short-term energy, but in the long run, it actually creates an energy deficit, because in order to break down the lactic acid and reutilize the glucose, you have to burn 6 ATP per lactic acid. So it's okay to utilize in the short term, but you actually will utilize more energy that way. So it's a net negative. Then direct phosphorylation, which is using creatine phosphate. So you get 1 ATP for creatine phosphate, which is creating creatine and ATP, and that lasts for a very short period of time. So some people will use the creatine as a post-energy or post-workout energy source to help them recover. Okay, so let's talk about the smooth muscle fibers. Now, smooth muscle fibers are going to be lining the viscera of the body. And the viscera would be internal organs like the digestive tract. And this is going to be an unconscious or involuntary muscle fiber. And they typically will have 2 different layers surrounding the digestive tract, and they can have as many as 3 in the stomach. It also has an oblique layer, but we'll get to that next term. The longitudinal layer and the circular layer are going to be surrounding the tubes that are going to be found in the digestive system. So the circular layer is, when it contracts, it's actually going to close off this tube. So imagine this layer wrapping around here, and if you squeeze that, if you contract those muscles, that tube gets smaller in width. And so it's good to maintain the proper opening, but it actually helps in the digestive tract to move food along in the system. So you squeeze, and then you take this longitudinal layer, which is on the outside, and it runs the long way along that digestive tract. And now you squeeze those and actually shorten the digestive tract, okay, opening up or dilating the lumen of the intestines, and that can lead to food being moved along the tract. So circular and longitudinal layers will have different purposes, but they work in harmony with each other. So they will be lining the blood vessels as well. So you can actually have the circular layer, which is going to constrict the blood vessels and divert blood flow to other areas within the body, where the longitudinal layer will actually dilate the blood vessels and open up blood flow to those areas. And we'll get into that a lot when we get into the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems of the nervous system. And we'll discuss why you would want to divert blood flow to different areas. So peristalsis is going to be utilizing these two muscular layers to move food along the digestive tract. It is essentially creating a wave of muscle contraction to push food from the mouth down the esophagus, churning in the stomach, and then pushing it through the small intestines, large intestines, and then out the body. So myofilaments of the smooth muscle fibers, there's few thick filaments with myosin heads. Calmodulin is going to be the calcium binding site rather than troponin. So that is a really big name to know because it likely will come up on a test. So calmodulin is where you bind calcium. Cal. Okay, so calmodulin in smooth muscle is essentially replacing the troponin that's found in skeletal muscle. So the thick and thin filaments are arranged diagonally, and you have an intermediate filament dense body network. So those are some of the big differences of the smooth muscle compared to skeletal muscle. Okay, so you have this chart here, and I'm not going to go too far in depth with this, but I do want to point out a few things. First of all is calcium is actually coming from the extracellular fluid. So it's coming from outside of the smooth muscle cell rather than the sarcoplasmic reticulum that will happen in skeletal muscle. Okay, it does still come somewhat from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, but a lot of it is from the ECF. Okay. The calcium will then bind to and activate the calmodulin, which is going to help to contract the muscle. And the activated myosin forms cross bridges with actin of the filaments, and shortening now begins. So those are the big things that I want you to know about smooth muscle. I know that I kind of sped through this slide, but calcium can come from the extracellular fluid. You have calmodulin binding to calcium, which will initiate that contraction of the muscle. Okay, this is a fantastic chart because you're going to need to know all the differences between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. So where are they found in the body? Okay, skeletal, touch the bones. Okay, cardiac, walls of the heart. Okay, cardiac is only found in the heart. So it makes it nice and easy. Smooth muscle. This is going to be hollow visceral organs, okay, other than the heart, because obviously that is cardiac muscle. Okay. Also intrinsic eye muscles, airways, large arteries. Okay. So if you know skeletal is to the skeleton, cardiac is to the heart, smooth is going to be everywhere else. Okay. The cell shape. Okay. Both the skeletal and cardiac are going to be striated. Okay. The skeletal is going to have single long cylindrical multinucleated cells. The cardiac and smooth are both going to be branching. Cardiac actually has these intercalated discs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Essentially, they're allowing the cardiac muscles to send signals and share signal from one cell to the next so that your heart can contract in unison, so that all the cells will contract in a wave to get the largest amount of pressure and pump the blood through the body. Okay, and so the cardiac muscle cells will be 1 to 2 nuclei per cell, whereas the smooth muscle is only 1 nuclei, no striations. And then the connective tissue. Skeletal, epimysium, perimysium, endomysium that we had talked about. Epi is surrounding the entire muscle, peri is surrounding the fascicle, and endo is surrounding each cell. Cardiac muscle connective tissue is going to have endomysium attaching to the fibrous skeleton of the heart, and we'll get into the different components of the heart next term, but that's the one that you want to know right now. And then smooth also has the endomysium separating it from each individual fiber. Okay, so in order to receive a signal to contract, each skeletal muscle must be served by it's got to be a nerve. Okay, which two types of muscle appear striated when examined under a microscope? So we just talked about this. It's cardiac and skeletal. Which of the following is not a prefix used to refer to muscle? The only one on here would be the lemma. That's actually going to be combined with sarco to mean the cell membrane of the muscle cell. Okay, so that is it for muscle. We're actually going to be discussing more about these tissues after the midterm, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask.